welcome to Fall Festival. I'm Maggie Lampier and I'm so excited to be joining the event today with Grace Company Quilting. I love all things quilting and stars, so I was so excited when I heard the theme is Look to the Stars. I am going to show you how to make a Wonky Star quilt and how I use automation with my QCT Pro on my long arm to get this quilted. If you've never heard of a Wonky Star or not really sure what I'm talking about, this is what they look like, and they all look different, and that is part of the fun. Making Wonky Star quilt blocks are a fun way to take a break from all of the precise cutting and measuring that normally goes into making a traditional quilt block. As you can see, I used all scraps in mine. It's a very scrappy, mismatched looking quilt, so it's a great way to use up scraps, or you can go ahead and use coordinating fabrics or that fat quarter bundle you've been saving up. One of the awesome things about this quilt is that you can make it however you want to. Very easy to modify, even the size of the blocks, and I will show you how to do that. You can plan out this quilt as much or as little as you want to, and it's so simple to make any size block that you want. First, I will show you how to make the Wonky Star, and then I will show you how I quilted it with this gold thread, and I actually imported a panto design into QCT Pro. That is one of the great features about QCT Pro, is that you can import outside designs into it. As soon as I heard that the event was called Look to the Stars, I knew exactly what panto I wanted to use, and it has these stars and swirls and moon shapes in it, and it's super fun. And I went with the gold thread because I thought it looks like actual stars. First, I will show you how to make a Wonky Star. Then I will go over to my long arm that has a QCT Pro Automation, and I will show you how to import an outside pano design, and then how I use Pano Stacker to make an edge-to-edge quilting design for this quilt. First, let's get started on how to make a Wonky Star in any size that you'd like. You're just going to need your basic quilting supplies, such as a cutting mat, acrylic square ruler, rotary cutter, iron, thread, and sewing machine. Let's get started. Like I mentioned, it's very easy to make any size block you want with the Wonky Star. You just have to pick a size. So this might depend on the size of scraps you have or the size quilt you want, how many blocks you want to make. Whatever it is, you'll want to pick a size. This one on the left here is actually with 3-inch squares, but the quilt I made, I used 5 inches. So I'll kind of show you the difference in size here, but it all works the same. If you want to do 5-inch squares like I did, it's a perfect opportunity to use up a charm pack for those middle squares or the outside ones. You will need 8 background squares and 1 center square, and then your scraps for the star points. So my middle square and all of the background squares are 5-inch squares, and then the scraps can be any size. We are just going to randomly be placing them to make these crazy looking stars. 4 of the 8 background squares will be in the 4 corners of the block, as you see here, and then the other 4 will be the squares we use when we are making the points of the star. So here I'm just going to lay it out to get an idea of where my background squares will be going, and then we will add our points to 4 out of these 8 squares. So I have this one in the middle, that will be our center block, and that will not change at all. That is the middle of the star. We're not going to sew on that at all or add any scraps there. And then I have my 8 squares surrounding it. Again, these are all 5-inch squares, but you can use whatever size you like. These 4 here, so the middle ones on the side and the top and bottom, is where we're going to add our points. Here's where you can grab your scraps or other fabric, and we are just going to place them right sides together and then sew a 1/4 inch from the edge of the scrap. You can play around with the angle as much as you want, but you want to make sure that when you fold it over with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, that you're covering up the entire corner of the background square, because we'll be trimming that back up. And you'll see what I mean in a minute here when we get sewing these on. So I'm just playing around with the scrap, making sure that's going to cover up the entire corner, and now I'm ready to sew it. So I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch from the edge here. After you've stitched those together, it should look like this. And you can repeat this with the other 3 squares so that you have 4 pieces with a randomly placed star point. I'm going to put away my 4 corner pieces for now while we work on the points, and I'll put away the center piece too. So once you've sewn on one of the points like this one, you're going to need your rotary cutter, and we're going to trim it back to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just be careful and make sure you are trimming on the side of the stitches that you want to be. So it should just be the side where that corner is. And again, just trim it back, and I'm going to go ahead and press this. It is totally up to you. You could also press the seam towards the darker fabric if you want, whatever you prefer. Just know it'll be a little bulkier when you're putting the block together if you're not pressing the seam open. With the seam pressed open, I am now going to trim this back to a 5-inch square again. So I grab a square acrylic ruler, I line up the edges that are already squared up where we didn't add any fabric here, because those should still be square from when you first made the 5-inch square or whatever size you're making. And then I'm trimming back the excess of the scrap fabric on the right and top corner there. Once you have done that, you should have a 5-inch square again, and now we're going to add on the other point of our star with another scrap piece of fabric. So as I grab another scrap, I'm just going to randomly place it. You can make really long, thin points, really short ones, more like normal, even shaped ones, whatever you want. This is the fun part. You really get to play around with it. Make sure if you're working with smaller scraps and you're not sure that's going to cover it up, just fold over the corner and make sure that it's all good. And again, sew this on with the 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now we're going to trim back the excess background fabric again. So we just have that 1/4-inch seam allowance on both pieces of fabric. Press the seam open, and then we're going to trim it back to a 5-inch square all over again. Once you get really good at this and the hang of it, you don't even need to use the full 5-inch squares for your background. I like to play it safe though and keep them, and then I keep the scraps for other projects like foundation paper piecing where you just need those little pieces. Once you've pressed that seam open, again, we are just trimming back to 5 inches, and now we have one of our finished squares that go into the Wonky Star block, and it is 2 points of our star. You'll see here, that's kind of what it's going to look like. So now we're going to repeat that with the other 3 edges or other 3 background squares with more scraps. Once you get going, you can try chain piecing with these, or however you prefer to piece your squares together is up to you. Just for each star you're going to make, you're going to need 4 of these point squares and 4 of just the plain background squares where we're not adding anything to them. Once you have your 4 point squares ready to go, let's bring back our 4 other background squares in the center square and line everything up because we are ready to put our block together. You want your centerpiece in the middle, those 4 background squares on the 4 outside corners, and then the points surrounding the middle one. I like to put mine together in rows, so I put together the first 3, middle 3, and bottom 3. I do prefer to press mine a certain way after I have those 3 rows put together, and I'll show you that in a second. But again, this is totally personal preference and up to you. You can press the seams open to alternating directions, whatever you like. I like to be able to nest my seams. So what I do with the top and bottom rows is I press those seams outward and I press the middle row seams inward towards that center point there. I feel like this reduces bulk a little bit. And like I said, I like to be able to nest my seams when I'm putting my rows together, and that allows me to do it. Then we're going to just take these 3 rows and put them together with that 1/4-inch seam allowance. And after that, we should have our first Wonky Star block. So here it is, a finished Wonky Star block. This is the 5-inch square version, and this is the 3-inch square version. I followed the same process with both size squares, so you just pick your size and go for it. I ended up making a total of 36 Wonky Star blocks and put them together in a 6x6 layout. Using the 5-inch squares gave me 13.5-inch blocks because we want to take in the seam allowance when we are calculating how large our quilt is going to be. And then once I put them all together, that gave me an 81-inch by 81-inch quilt. And that's pretty big. So you definitely don't have to do that size. You can modify as needed, change your block size, change how many you're going to do total, whatever you like. Now let's move on. We have a finished quilt top and now we can quilt it on our long arm. I quilt on a Qnique 19X Elite and I have a Quilter's Evolution rolling frame. I'm going to be using QCT Pro Automation. And though Grace Company's automation comes with a ton of amazing designs, I really wanted to use this pantograph design for this quilt specifically. So I'm going to show you first how to import a pattern into the QCT Pro software. So first I'm starting with my external drive. This is like just a file folder basically. You can use any type. So you're going to want to plug this into your computer or wherever you have the pantograph stored. I purchased one from SoShabbyPantos.com. It's called Star Power if you're interested in the one I'm using today. Right here, the name of my drive is Extreme SSD. Yours will be different. It'll all just depend on what your drive name is. And now I'm in another folder where I keep all of my pantograph designs. Yours will probably come with a ton of different versions. You can move them all onto your drive if you'd like, but I only need this QLI file. So that is the one I'm going to grab and drag it over to my external drive and then let it upload there. I always make sure that it's actually there before unplugging the drive, and there it is, Star Power QLI. Now I can unplug the drive and bring it over to the tablet that is connected to my. Now we are almost ready to get quilting, but we have to import that design and do a few other things on the software before it gets started. First thing you're going to need to do is open up your QCT software on your tablet. Make sure to move your machine to the middle of the quilting area, just like it instructs you to in the beginning, and press OK. Mine was not, so I'm going to go ahead and move it over before I continue and make sure that your needle is up. Once everything's loaded, you will see this screen here, and we are going to go into Pantograph or the Pano Stacker. As always, the first thing we're going to need to do is set our maximum quiltable area. So the first thing we need to do is bring it over to the top left. So I move my machine over to the top left like it says, and I usually go about 2 inches to the left of my quilt top. And then I don't go right up against the bar in the back because I don't want to take a chance of it bumping up there at all. So I go a little bit away from that. And then, like I said, a few inches over from the quilt top and press the button to set that area. Next, we need to go over to the bottom right corner of our quiltable area. So again, I'm going to move my machine over to the bottom right. I'll go 2 to 3 inches away from my quilt top to the right, and then an inch or so away from the bar because again, I don't want it bumping up against the bar at all. Once I've made it to that spot, I go ahead and press the bottom right button on the screen. And now the machine knows how far to the right and left, up and down it can quilt. We have this rectangle set up so it knows exactly where it can quilt. Now, when you select pattern at the top of the screen here, you'll see all of the amazing patterns that already come with your QCT software. There are a lot to choose from, and you can do so many different things with it. I am still going to import my own pattern though, so what we're going to do is close out of the screen, but we'll be back to it. I have to plug in my external drive that I had put that QLI file on. If you're using one of the tablets that you can purchase through Grace Company with your automation, which is what I'm using, it'll be this bottom plug in here. It is the one beneath the one that connects to your machine. So I'm going to unplug this bottom one. That is actually just the power cord or the charging cord. My tablet is fully charged, so I don't need that right now, and I'm going to plug in my external drive. Again, this top one here, don't unplug that one. That is what is connecting the tablet to your actual long arm machine. Once I have that all plugged in, I need to import my design. So I click on plugins in the upper right corner, and I'm going to do batch import. After I click batch import, I should be able to go to new drive in the upper left corner of the screen here, and you should see your device name. So if you remember from earlier, when we were moving the files from my computer onto the device, it's called Extreme SSD. This will all depend on what your device's name is. It'll likely be different from mine, but you're going to select whatever your drive is named here. Next, you'll need to find the file or pantograph file that you want to import.
Click it and then click the import button. You'll see the import process was complete and it should say success over there. So I can press the OK button and now the file is on the machine and I don't need to import anymore. I just wanted that one today. So now we're going to go back to that select pattern screen. Now again, you'll see all of the amazing options that QCT comes with. I, for some reason, closed out. Let's go back in and just select pattern. And now we're going to go to this patterns file folder in the upper left. Now you're going to find the file that says batch. These are all pantos that I have imported and I found my star power one right here. And right away, it's going to stretch out to meet the entire area or the entire quiltable area that we set in the beginning. You probably don't want that, so we're going to have to play around with the design a little bit. There are a lot of options on this screen to customize the design, the size, how many times you want the pattern to repeat. First here, I am going to set the pattern height to be a lot shorter. I don't want the pattern to be all the way from the top to the bottom of the quiltable area. I'm going to try 5 inches at first. Now my pattern height is 5 inches and I want way more than one pattern going across. So I'm going to keep clicking this button until it looks kind of how I want it to look on the quilt. You can do 1 or 2 rows of the pantograph at a time by selecting the plus button in the row area. I am just going to stick with 1 row today on mine. And I always adjust the total height to be a little bit smaller than the entire quiltable area. You'll see here with the 2 rows, you would have to play around with it a little bit so that they're closer together so that you don't have this big gap in the middle here. I'm going to go ahead and adjust my total height to 10 inches, which gives me an extra 3 inches in my maximum quiltable area that actually won't be being quilted while I'm quilting in zones. This just gives me a little bit of wiggle room for when I'm rolling my quilt and moving it around as we go from row to row. Though I really do like the 2 row option because you can see how the rows are going to be fitting in together, I'm just going to keep it simple today and do 1 row at a time in my zones. While using the QCT Pro software, you can sew in zones. So you set the zone area and then it will do the pattern that you have set up here on this screen in that zone that you've set. Here I'm just messing around with the total height of my zone and then the pattern height so that everything's set up. You don't want a ton of extra quiltable area on top and bottom of your panto design that you're setting up, because then those gaps will be on the quilt in the quilting too, unless that's the look that you're aiming for. Like I mentioned earlier, my blocks are about 13.5 inches and I want at least 2 rows within each block. So I'm setting my pattern height to 6 inches, then the total height to 6.25. So the rows won't be butted right up against each other. There will be that ½ inch in between the two. If you want them closer together, just go ahead and set your total height to be really close to the pattern height. This is looking good to me. I like the spacing, so I'm going to go ahead and click Sew in Zones on the bottom right corner. Here it will give you the option to save this design. I always click yes and save it in case I have a large quilt, something comes up and I have to walk away from quilting. I can always come back, reload this exact pattern, and I won't have to mess around with it again or try to remember what settings I had set up. You can name it whatever you want. I'm calling mine Star Power Wonky Stars so that I remember what it is. This first screen here is going to show the panel design you just set up, and it's going to place it at the top of your quiltable area that you had set. So if you look on the screen, the larger rectangle is the total quiltable area, and then that smaller rectangle with the actual pantograph design in it is the design that I set up. So we need to set up our zone. You probably noticed me pointing at the A square button at the bottom of the screen there where it says A, and then it's like the upper left part of the rectangle. So that will be where you want the top left of your pantograph design to start. So I go ahead and grab the machine and move it up to the upper left corner of my quilt where I want the design to start. I usually go a little bit off of the quilt so that it's all the way edge to edge quilting. and then I go ahead and press that A button. Now I'm going to go ahead and move over to the B part of the zone, which is the upper right corner of the quilt, and do the same exact thing. So I go about an inch off, and then I go ahead and press the B button on this. Setting your A and B points of the zone are critical and definitely necessary. You can also set your C and D, which are the bottom two quadrants, but I am not doing that today. I just set my A and B, and I'm going to let it go with the height that I set on the previous screen. Now you'll see here on the screen, it will probably have moved your rectangle with the pano design within the quiltable area to where it actually should be in the quiltable area that you have set up on your frame. You can click the setting button at the top of the screen to change any of your settings. I already have mine all set up for what I'd like, but there's sewing speed, tie off stitch count, tie off mode, stitches per inch, and a few other options. You can switch those here and press OK when you're ready. Now you don't have to move your machine at this point, but I like to move it over kind of to the area where we're going to begin sewing, or at least in that direction. Go ahead and click sew. I am ready to start, and my pantograph is all set up. I set up the zone, my quiltable area, and I'm ready to go. So I click the sew button, and now the machine is moving over to where it wants to start with the pantograph. This is my favorite part. I think it is so cool that it knows where to go and what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do my little tie off stitch here, and then it will begin quilting. Like I mentioned, I'm using gold thread, which is kind of a different option for me. I usually like to go with something lighter, but I really wanted the quilting to stand out for this design. And I thought it would really bring in all the white low volume scraps together. And here on the screen, you can see where the stitching is and progress of the pantograph and quilting design. And now we just get to sit back and supervise and watch the automation do its thing. Once your machine gets to the end of the design you set up, it'll stop on its own and do a little back stitch or whatever method you had selected in your settings. And now we're going to want to hit the mark zones button right in the bottom center of the screen. I like to use a fabric marking pen, or you can use the machine settings to do a single stitch to mark my zones. So first I click mark zones, and the machine is going to move to the bottom right corner of your zone so that you can mark it, so that when you move, you can reselect your zone and set it up so that everything's lining up. So there's my needle right there. I'm just going to do a little mark with my pen right underneath where it's set up. Like I said, you can also use the single stitch option on your machine, which is really nice. I just find it easier. Make sure you have snipped your threads so that the machine isn't pulling on them. And then we're going to click mark next on the screen, and the machine will move over to the next part of the zone, which should be the bottom left corner of where you just were sewing. So if you look at the design on the screen here, that is where the machine is going to move to mark the next zone. We just marked that one. Now let's move over to the left and mark the bottom over there. So I clicked mark next, and the machine will move on its own over to where we need to mark our next part of the zone. Now that we've moved over here, we can mark the zone again. I'm just using a pen, like I said, or you could do the single stitch option on the machine, whatever you prefer. So you'll see here up close, that's where it is. And now I'm going to click continue on the screen. The machine knows I didn't use the stitch option, so it thinks my zones aren't marked, so it's going to have this warning message, and I'm going to go ahead and click through it. Now we can go ahead and set up the next zone, so you will see this pantograph design move down on the screen as you set it up. So I'm going to go over to my zone that I just marked, so the bottom of it right here where that red pen is, I'm going to put the needle right over it and then press that A quadrant part of my design. And so this is just setting it up so that it knows, again, where to stitch. So I go right here where I had previously marked and press A. Then we're going to go over, back over to the right and do the same exact thing with the B. Again, we move all the way over, find where we had previously marked the bottom of the last zone we did, and then press the B button on the screen. Now I'm ready to start sewing again. So I can go ahead and you'll see the design has moved down on the quiltable area because we already quilted that top part and I haven't moved the quilt on my rolling frame at all. So now I'm going to press the sew button, and again, the machine will move over to the left to where it wants to start the design and it will start stitching. After this next row is quilted, I will have to move the quilt, but I will do the same exact process where I mark my zone. Make sure to do that before moving your quilt on the frame. Once it's marked, then go ahead and move your quilt, and again, set it up in the same manner we just did with our first 2 rows. Repeat this for your whole quilt, and then you will be all done. Your quilt is quilted. It is so much fun, so easy with the QCT Pro software. I don't know what I would do without it. And now you know how to import a panto design from outside of the software if you were ever to want or need to do that.
That was so much fun. Thank you so much for joining me and making this Wonky Star quilt today. I hope you enjoyed it and are feeling inspired to try out your own Wonky Star quilt and to get started with QCT Pro's Pano Stacker. Thank you for joining me today. I can't wait to see your Wonky Stars. Make sure to tag me, Maggie Lampier, and Grace Company Quilting in any social media posts that you have where you're making a Wonky Star quilt. I would love to see it. For more sewing tutorials and project inspiration like this, make sure to follow me, Maggie Lampier, on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube. And if you're looking for a new online fabric shop with colorful, fun designs, check out my online shop, joyintheseam.com, for your next project. Thank you so much for joining.